I will be the first to admit that my life is beautiful. I have an angelic face and a body made for sex. At least that's what more than one man has told me. For me, this means that I never had a problem with male attention and played happily on this field until I was 24. Then, after a serious conversation with my parents, I decided to settle down and seriously think about fulfilling my civic duty and giving them grandchildren. Being the only child of wealthy parents, I never needed any serious qualifications or serious work. My father tried to push me to study some field that would allow me to take over his business when he retired, but I simply wasn't interested. I don't know if that's what subconsciously first attracted me to Dave, but he was perfect. A superb physical specimen, sharp as a whip, already with a business degree and an MBA. I think Mom and Dad fell in love with him before I did. We got married a year later, and less than a month later, I became pregnant. 10 years passed, and I was the most beautiful Soxermom at the private school my kids attended. I picked them up in a top-of-the-line BMW and then drove them to our 12-room mansion in the greenest suburb of our city. Dave, or the 15-year-old schoolgirl who lived next door, looked after them 2 or 3 evenings a week when I went to my job as chairman or board member of some church or charity. On weekends, I usually went shopping with my girlfriends on Saturday, while Mom looked after the kids and Dave played 18 holes with Dad. On Sunday mornings, Dave and I took the kids to church. I'm not particularly religious, but at our social level, it's kind of expected, you know? We were sitting on a bench that my grandfather had sponsored after he made his first fortune. Later, we went to Sunday lunch at my parents' house, catered, of course, where lately Dad and Dave had been discussing the process of Dad retiring and my husband taking over. After lunch, as a rule, we left the children with my parents, and Dave and I went home and did what married people do. Well, some of the things married people do. Early on in our sex life, I decided that I would be conservative in the bedroom. This was the case until recently. Yes, I found my ideal man, a fantastic father, an amazing provider, and an attentive lover. I have money, comfort, status, respect, and almost everything I want. Almost. It all started with an erroneous keystroke while I was browsing the internet one day. One wrong key, 60 minutes of viewing, and the days when my husband was enough for me were numbered. You see, I accidentally stumbled upon the site and discovered a side of myself that I didn't even know I had. Soon I was rushing home after dropping the kids off at school and visiting more and more websites. This whole painful thing is not about me, but the idea of being shackled bound, blindfolded, helpless, while a strong man does whatever he pleases me, delights me. The first weekend after I discovered this side of myself, I took time off to go shopping with my friends, then pretended to be sick so I could stay home and not go to church. After Sunday lunch, I tried to refuse sex with Dave, but to no avail. In the end, I just stretched my arms above my head, grabbing the headboard of the bed and imagining that I was tied to it. The obvious solution to my ever-increasing cravings was to confess my new addiction to my husband. I'm sure he would have done everything necessary to make me happy, but, of course, good girls don't do that. Instead, I began to pretend, and my sexual frustration grew. I felt like a tightly coiled spring. My downfall began when I discovered the forum. There was a section where people could meet and then tell the rest of the readers how hot their last scene was. And they were hot, related, blindfolded, in a collar. Their words were as moving as the images that accompanied them. I won't bore you with the details, but on the internet I met a guy who was an experienced dominant and lived a few hours away from me. The photos showed a guy who was probably in his mid-40s but still looked in good shape. He said he was married and his wife didn't like that kind of thing. He shared nude photos of himself with me, but I only sent him photos of my body. I was very careful and cleared everything off our computer, deleted browsing history and everything. I stored some of my favorite things on a memory card, which I hid in the lining of my rarely used purse. I don't think I ever consciously made the decision to cheat on my husband. I've definitely never had an internal debate with myself. I just didn't take any steps to stop the situation when this guy, his name is Darren, ordered me to take time off work to meet him. My conscience didn't really bother me either. I felt forced to satisfy a sexual desire that did not pose a threat to my marriage. No threat, because Dave was never supposed to find out, just like everyone else I knew. Good girls don't do anything even remotely close to what I planned. I started making a list of everything I would need to provide. Darren apparently interpreted my temporary silence as reticence. He bombarded me with stories of what he was going to do to me when we met. Some of them were not to my taste, but we agreed. I know being tied up by a complete stranger is a huge risk, but I was obsessed, like I said. I hinted that our meetings could become regular, which meant that if he didn't give in the first time, there wouldn't be a repeat. In fact, I realized that the longer the affair went on, the chances of discovery increased exponentially, and I vowed to limit the experience. You see, I did my research. The negotiations ended, and I continued my research on how not to get caught. I know that people say that cheaters are always caught, but this is just propaganda and statistics. Stories and statistics about how people get away with cheating are never published. I imagine that for every betrayal discovered, there are 10 hidden ones. So, over the next 3 weeks, my life returned to normal. Dropping the kids off at school, rushing home, looking at pictures and videos of everything I had agreed upon with Darren, then reading stories about cheating wives until it was time to pick up the kids again. My friends inevitably got tired of being rejected when they called to ask me to meet, but at the time I didn't notice. At the very beginning of this journey, I discovered that one of the main signs that a cheating wife had been discovered was changes in behavior. A little honest self-reflection revealed that I was giving all the signals to whoever was watching me. I forced myself to return to normal behavior when I was being watched, especially remembering to ask my husband to have sex, but also making a list of precautions. I should meet Darren somewhere on the other side of town where I would never be recognized. My husband travels at least 4 times every 2 weeks for work. After all, he is a business development manager at his dad's company. Proving that he is where he says he is not difficult. I will ask him to take a photo of the room when I call in the evening. I will say that I miss him and want to imagine myself where he is. I must leave the house only after 10 in the evening so that no one can call me or come to me and find that I am not at home. I intended to leave my mobile phone and car at home in case someone installed beacons on them. I should meet Darren at an inexpensive motel where it's unlikely that my friends would be able to notice me. This made me smile. I knew that at least 3 of my friends had successfully hidden their affairs in the past. Wouldn't it be ironic if I was discovered by a friend meeting her beau at the same motel? I added a wig and other disguise items to the list. I have to keep them in my locker at the tennis club so that they are only visible for a minimal amount of time. I have to pay for the room in cash and book it either in person a few days in advance or by phone from one of the charities I volunteer for. I will get to the motel by taxi, which will pick me up at a local park, which I can walk to. This way, other people's cars won't be visible in the driveway, and I won't be seen leaving at an odd hour. Thanks to mobile phones, telephone booths in our city are a thing of the past. So the only weak point in my plans was calling taxis on my mobile. The best thing I could do was immediately erase all records of the call. It's unlikely that Dave would go through my phone log to check every single number. So, we sorted things out with my husband and friends. The only problem that remained was what to do with the children. Our full-time nanny has to be home by 10 o'clock at night, and even then she can't be counted on not accidentally mentioning to her husband that she babysat the kids while Dave was away. I wasn't going to look after them with someone I didn't know, and the youngest one is too young for sleepovers. There remained one possible, although far from attractive, option. I can put my children to sleep and limit the time I am away. Let's say leave at 10:15 p.m. An hour's taxi ride, 5 hours with Darren, another hour's taxi ride, and I could be home by 5:15 a.m., which at this time of year is still an hour before dawn. The wig and coat, which I almost never wear, were supposed to protect me from being identified by pre-dawn dog walkers and insomniacs. As frustrating as it was to put my children to sleep, I was obsessed. The closer my preparations came to fulfilling my new fantasies, the more problems became apparent. In fact, it took a huge amount of willpower for me to critically analyze my plans. I experimented with various over-the-counter sleeping pills, all of which were listed as safe for small children, and found doses that kept me awake with them when it was time to get up for school. To guarantee 100% results, I did this every night for a week. She stopped only when Dave commented on their changed habits. It was during one of our internal security review sessions that I began to worry about what would happen if Darren turned out to be a serial killer, or even if he got carried away and marked me beyond our agreed-upon boundaries. I noticed that his email address consisted of his initials and last name, and after half an hour of Googling, I had the address. I subtly let him know that before we met, I would leave clues about his identity in case I disappeared. He assured me that I would be safe. I also understood the weakness of the situation, where he might be caught cheating on his wife, which would lead her to me and my husband, so I insisted that he take the same precautions as I did. I found it hard to believe that his wife knew and condoned his meetings with other women. He provided an STD test, which I requested because I enjoy unprotected sex, and there was no risk of unwanted pregnancy due to the birth control pills I religiously take every morning at 8:30. So, evening came. It's 10:10 p.m. I've finished dressing in the tight black dress Dave bought me a couple of years ago, and my bag with my toiletries and a few things for the night, as my grandmother said, is already packed. Caller ID showed that Dave was calling from a number with an area code that matched where he was supposed to be, a 3-hour flight away. The taxi was already on its way, and the children were fast asleep in their cribs. I ended up paying cash for 3 nights of room rental, under a fictitious name, of course. The extra night was Darren's idea and, in my opinion, a very reasonable one. By the time I get there, and then I have to leave to get home before dawn, we will have barely 5 quality hours. What if I like it and want more? Dave is away until his plane lands at lunchtime on Thursday. I could repeat what I would do tomorrow and Wednesday evening. After all, money for a room means nothing to such a wealthy lady like me. 3 nights to get it all out of my head. 3 nights to prevent this from becoming a long-term endeavor where the chances of being discovered increase exponentially. Yes, it was a smart move. I logged into our computer to check if there were any last-minute emails from Darren. There weren't any. I checked to see if there was any evidence in the deleted folder, then sent a short SMS to my future owner saying that I was on my way. Looking at my watch, I saw that it was time to go to the park to meet a taxi. Taking one last look in the mirror, I asked myself if I should retreat even now, but the little devil on my shoulder said no. What could go wrong? I put the phone on the kitchen counter and walked out. By the time the taxi dropped me off at the motel, I was wet with anticipation. There was no one around, which was nice. I knocked carefully on the door to room 310 and smiled at Darren's forethought. There was already a Do Not Disturb sign on the doorknob. When Darren opened the door, only the bedside light was on. My first impression was disappointment. His photo on the website must be out of date, because in reality, he was about 10 years older than I thought and weighed much more. Later, I noticed that his fingers were stained with nicotine, and when he kissed me, his breath emanated the distinct smell of alcohol mixed with stale cigarettes. That's all I had time to do before, after a short hello and a touch of my lips, he pounced on me. I heard the dress tearing as he hurriedly took it off. As soon as it disappeared, he stood behind me, placing a muscular hand on my shoulder and covering my mouth. I felt him fiddle with the clasp of my bra, but only for a few seconds before he, in his impatience, simply yanked it forcefully. All this time, his rough hand muffled my protesting sounds. I liked it. As soon as I was naked except for the rings, his free hand roughly groped my breasts. I just hoped he remembered his promise not to mark me, but judging by his breathing, he didn't have much control over himself. Almost tripping over the bag I dropped on the floor, Darren dragged me to the bed and, without allowing me to open my mouth, pushed me onto it. He somehow covered my mouth with his shoulder, freeing both hands to secure one, and then both of my hands, with the cuffs already attached to the bed. They were soft, but made of real steel, and held my outstretched arms motionless. When I was helpless, he reached under the pillow and took out a harness, which he placed on my head. I'm not entirely sure how it works, but it held a ball securely in my mouth, rendering me completely unable to make any speech sounds other than grunts and groans. He then secured each ankle to opposite bedposts. He stepped back to admire his work before ripping off his clothes. While I basked in the sensations, melting from the feeling of helplessness, I thought that I had done the right thing. I can spend 3 nights without risk, and no one will ever know about it. True, stopping my new hobby in the near future may be a problem, but I am sure that the risk of this can be reduced with a little research. Jen, this is Dave. My kids just called me and said that when they woke up this morning, Portia wasn't home. They searched the whole house but could not find her. Dave paused to catch his breath from the adrenaline rushing through his system. His mother-in-law was concerned about the tone of his voice. Well, she's not here. Can't you come there as soon as possible? Of course. I'll call you when I arrive. Dave, having flown home as quickly as he could, had just finished hugging his children tightly. They were brave, but it was clear from their eyes that they were very worried. He turned to his relatives and thanked them for being there for his family. Have you tried going to the police again, Pete? Yes, the answer is the same. Unless there is evidence to the contrary, within the first 48 hours they assume the person has simply left. Everything is as neat as a pin, and there is no sign that Portia has just left the house. Dave chimed in. Except her car is still in the garage and her phone is on the table near the back door instead of on the charger where she usually keeps it. Portia's mother, Jen, noticed the children were upset by the conversation and took them into the kitchen to finish preparing dinner. Dave and Pete retired to the office. Dave's father-in-law lowered his voice to a more conspiratorial level. Her phone was here, but her house keys and purse were not. It's like she just went out to the store and never came back. But the nearest store is an hour's walk away, and my Portia would never leave the children like that. There's one more strange thing, Dave. I found this on the kitchen table. The older man showed him a bottle of over-the-counter baby sedative and a tiny measuring cup. The obvious reason why these objects were there did not suit the man who dearly loved his wife and respected her devotion to motherhood above all her other outstanding qualities. The possibility that she had deliberately drugged them with a sedative was so far removed from the image of his wife that he ignored it and returned to his concerns. The last time his children saw their mother was when she put them to bed at 9:30 p.m. the night before. Where was she? His own phone call to the police confirmed the relative's words. Since there was no disturbance in the house and his wife's purse and keys were missing, they assumed that she had simply left and did not want to be found. And so it happened. Dave then called everyone in their address book. Nobody saw the Porsche. He and his family focused on keeping the children occupied, but everyone in the family had trouble sleeping that night. In the morning, Dave, staggering from fatigue, came into the kitchen, where Pete had already drunk half his coffee. They exchanged pleasantries, until the older man expressed his opinion. "Dave, have you checked her email yet? You have access, right?" "Good idea, Dad. If she hasn't changed her password, I will be able to access her account." They went into the office and started the family computer. Porsche's password worked, and soon the couple were spying with all their might. The inbox looked normal, and sorting the emails by sender and quickly going through the list didn't reveal any unfamiliar names. Pete, who felt more comfortable using the computer than his brother-in-law, suggested checking the deleted items folder. It turned out to be empty. The elderly man's heart sank even more. He suggested that Dave check the sent items folder, already expecting that it would also be empty. That's almost exactly what happened. Almost, except for a single letter sent to Hardman a little after 10 on Monday evening. The simple message was chilling. "I'll be there soon." Either Portia didn't bother to delete it, or it was transferred after she cleared out her sent messages folder. Dave turned away, and the bottle of baby sedative from the previous evening came into his field of vision. A connection clicked in Dave's mind as Peter followed his gaze, and he quickly came to the same conclusion. Of course, she didn't do it, did she? Is there a better theory? Anger at his wife fought for dominance with fear. It was starting to look like Portia put her kids on sleeping pills so she could meet someone on Monday night and, for some reason, didn't come back. Armed with this circumstantial evidence of foul play, Dave called the police again. They still refused to intervene, but suggested that he take the children for a blood test, which he did. Afterwards, he took them to school and then went home. Tam emailed Hardman, "Just tell Portia to come home. Her kids are worried. If you hurt her, I will find you and kill you." Wednesday evening passed just as slowly as the previous one. The pathology lab called early Thursday morning to say that the children's blood samples had found fairly high levels of chemicals found in sedatives. With possible evidence of a crime, the police finally took the case seriously and asked for the email address found on the computer, but warned them not to get their hopes up, as identifying people by email address is questionable at best. With nothing else to do, all three adults sat by their phones and waited for news. I stood in front of my own front door, disheveled, exhausted, and scared. I clutched my torn, tight black dress in my hands, the same one I wore on Monday evening, so that it would not tear and expose my left bare breast. I slowly inhaled and exhaled, trying to calm myself, trying to forget the nightmare that had been the last 3 days. Trying not to think about the horror that was about to break out in the next few hours. But the nightmare. I couldn't get rid of the memories of the nightmare. I remembered what seemed like years ago, that feeling of sweaty Darren grumbling over me. He must have seen the look of pleasure in my eyes, and he probably didn't like it. He reached towards my left ear and took out something from under the pillow. It was a black leather device similar to the 9-tailed whip from the old days. It had several leather tassels, each with a knot at the end. It hurt, and my eyes had to show him that, as did my muffled scream. The expression on his face was disgusting as he wielded the whip. Only now did I realize what a completely helpless situation I had put myself in. I screamed. When the tails struck again, my eyes begged the man above me to stop. Apparently, this was the moment he had been waiting for, because with a mighty roar, he finished. I closed my eyes in humiliation, real humiliation, not the fantasies that I saw on all sites. My mind was terrified of what Darren might do next and what form he would leave my body in. From the place where my mind full of horror rushed, Strange sounds brought me back. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was that the expression of pleasure had disappeared from Darren's face. It was replaced by an expression of anguish. He gasped and clutched his chest, and his face turned a sickening white color. As I watched, he suddenly collapsed on me and twitched for probably half a minute before I heard a sound that I had only read about in books. Death rattle. Darren was dead. His entire weight was pressing down on my chest, and it felt like every time I exhaled, I didn't have the strength to fill my lungs again. I thrashed around in a panic, but since my arms and legs were fully extended, I could not find any leverage to push him off. As terrible as this experience was, it was overshadowed by my horror. It was probably 11:30 p.m. and I was stuck here, unable to call for help because I couldn't communicate beyond grumbling or reach out to the wall to knock on it with any part of my body. I hang around here until the maid comes to check if I need anything in the room. When? At 9 or 10 in the morning? By this time, my children should have woken up from their sleeping pill-induced sleep, gone to Mom's room to wake her, and found that she was gone. I could imagine their horror when they discovered the house was empty, and it made me panic and start rushing around. However, I pulled myself together, thinking that I could again move Darren's body into a position where my lungs were being compressed. I stopped moving and started crying. What will my children do when they find themselves alone? Will they go to the neighbors, or they'll use the sheet of speed dial numbers next to their home phone and call who? Dave or my parents? Neither one nor the other was good. Dave will be scared and confused and will immediately call my cell phone, which will ring from the table near the door of the house. Then he will call my parents and my mother will go into the house as quickly as she can. Dad will be at work. She'll find that I'm gone, and maybe my phone, but not my purse. So what? Will he call Dave? Will he call the police? In any case, I'm screwed. Unless... And this is where my mind grasped at a straw. The maid doesn't come very early and I can convince her to find the keys to the handcuffs and let me go, and then I promise her enough money so she doesn't immediately call the police. I can get maybe $10,000 in cash quickly and without leaving a trace. I can rush home as quickly as possible, wake up the kids, apologize for oversleeping, and take them to school. Then call the police. I can threaten to sue them if they tell the media about this and have it all sorted out by the time the kids graduate from school, or ask their mom to pick them up. There's nothing wrong with that. Two consenting adults engaging in legal activity, which just went really badly. All was good. Everything will be fine. Then I remembered that I booked a room for 3 fucking days, but that was also normal. The maid still checks each room daily for fresh towels and so on. Then I remembered the Do Not Disturb sign on the outside handle, and all my illusions collapsed. I heard myself make a sound through the gag that was half a moan, half a sigh. The death rattle of my marriage and perfect life. Daylight filtered in through the tightly closed curtains, slightly raising the temperature in the room. Just enough to make my trembling subside a little. How long can a person go without water? I seem to remember no more than 2 or 3 days. I might have known this if I had paid more attention in school instead of spending all my effort on making sure my clothes were better than the other girls and that they were revealing enough to attract the bulk of the male attention in class. Then I thought that death might be preferable to what awaited me. My legacy and memory may be destroyed, but at least I won't be around to see it. Judging by the brightness of the curtains, the sun had risen high enough to penetrate the narrow gap between the rows of rooms in the cheap motel, which once again confirmed that there would be no escape that day. My tongue is already stuck to the roof of my mouth. I hoped I could talk fast enough so the maid wouldn't call the police when she found me in the morning. Since there were no police, all sorts of explanations were plausible, but as night fell, I realized that some of them were bizarre deliriums caused by desperation and thirst. I think my last conscious thought before the headache and delirium consumed me was a simple one. I'm done for, and all this because of one stupid decision. I never met the maid who found me, although I would very much like to do so one day when I am armed with something deadly. My first memory was of being shaken on the gurney as they put me into the ambulance. I was hooked up to one of those devices that drip stuff into you. The emergency personnel apparently recognized my extreme dehydration and began pouring fluids into me. They also placed my purse next to me. My next memory is of being wheeled to the hospital and someone trying to take my bag. I clung to her as if to a terrible death. I'll contact my family when I'm ready, and I've had at least half a chance to pursue a plausible story. Until then, I plan to remain unknown. With the help of heat packs and an IV, followed by small sips of water, I recovered physically enough to start thinking straight again after lunch. The planning was interrupted when I was questioned by the police. I insisted on the truth and reminded them of their duty of care, threatening legal action personally if my story became known to the media. As he left, the sergeant looked at me with a look that seemed to mix amusement and pity. By mid-afternoon, I had a credible story, but I won't bore you. Much of it depended on the fact that my family would be so relieved by my sudden appearance that they would not ask too many questions. During the evening rounds before 7 o'clock in the evening, the staff doctor finally released me, and I quickly put on my torn dress. On the way, I asked the nurse if there was a clothing store nearby that was open at that time of day, and received a sharp and rather cold no. She still deigned to call me a taxi, and I sat at the entrance to the hospital and waited for him, calm and confident, despite my outfit. There was a TV in the waiting room tuned to the 7 o'clock news, and that ended my confidence and my life. The main news was dedicated to a little old me. There were photographs of me lying on the motel bed underneath the dead Darren, apparently taken by the maid and sold to the media. My face was blacked out, I assume, for legal reasons. After all, it was a coroner-controlled scene. However, the television cameras did not show such courtesy. How they got ahead of the departing ambulance I will never know, but they did. My face was clearly visible as the gurney was brought to the ambulance. They even showed me one of the handcuffs still attached to my wrists. I passed out and must have almost been carried to the taxi when it pulled up. Who gave the driver my address is a mystery, but my next memory is that I am standing here, right now, facing the door leading into the execution yard, devoid of hope or even the desire to fight. All the illusions I could entertain lasted about 300 milliseconds after my husband opened the door. Over his shoulder, I saw the TV. It was tuned to the very station on which I had so recently seen myself. He looked into my eyes, raising an eyebrow questioningly. This was it, my moment of truth, my opportunity to say that I was kidnapped, handcuffed to a bed, and abused for 3 days, that I am worthy of his pity, not contempt. Then I looked at my phone, still on the table, next to the door, at the purse in my hand, then at what I was wearing. With that last glance, all the remaining struggle in me faded away. I sank to my knees in shame and defeat. Dave didn't have to say a word. As if that wasn't enough, I heard a high-pitched voice ask from somewhere behind me, "Really, Portia, are you drugging your own children with sleeping pills?" It was my own mother's voice. If my mother is confident enough to judge me, I know that in my father's eyes I will be written off. He loves Dave like the son he never had, almost as much as he loves me. I don't know how much time passed after the door slammed in my face. I heard a voice behind me asking me to confirm my name. It was the police. I was arrested, handcuffed, taken to the station, and charged. When they showed me the evidence, my fingerprints on the bottle of sedative, my absence from the house and the children's blood tests, I saw no point in denying anything. The media, of course, went into a frenzy. A famous mother drugs her children so she can go on a date with her lover, and then that lover dies while she is tied to the bed and trapped for 3 days. After 4 nights in jail, when it became obvious that no one was going to post bail, the state released me on my own recognizance. Someone must have alerted the media because they were all waiting for me outside the prison, and it was the longest walk of my life until they finally gave up. I reconsidered my options when my feet led me to the main street of the city. My superficial socialite friends will never have anything to do with me again without the risk of being smeared with my poison. My children are old enough to understand that I took a risk and betrayed them in the worst way a mother can. Besides, they have a caring father and 2 sets of close grandparents. They don't need me. If I had stayed, I would have been laughed at and spat on until the memory of my behavior faded, and then simply shunned until death. I looked in my wallet to see how much cash I had. Less than $200. I saw an ATM on the other side of the street and decided to check if any of my cards still worked. In my opinion, the odds were 50-50, but we all know how bad my judgment has been lately. If any of my cards work, I'll turn left toward the bus station. If it doesn't work, I'll turn right. To the bridge over the long descent to the river. I inserted the first card and held my breath. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you.